if you're like me and you're listening out there, and so many times you find yourself overwhelmed and you actually feel like you're procrastinating on something that you just don't have time to do right now, or you haven't clearly defined what's important to you. Can you talk a little bit about that cycle and that challenge that a lot of people that are doing maybe a little bit too much may be experiencing?
Yeah, there's a few ways to go at that. And one of those things is that sometimes people who are habitual procrastinators, so they're using avoidance as a coping mechanism, they say yes to everything as another way of avoiding. They avoid saying no. That's the one thing disappointing others. Then they can always have too much on the go, and it gives them a self-handicapping excuse. Well, I didn't get that done well because I got all these other things going on. And then on top of all of that, I agree with you completely. They're they're not focused on what is it that I'm trying to accomplish here? What is it I want to do? What are the important goals for me? And not get caught up in, well, we can go back to even the guru Stephen Covey in that respect, the unimportant, unurgent quadrant of that's really classic time management thing. You're not doing the important, non-urgent stuff that really takes your life forward with the things that you want. So yeah, we can be binging because it's a way of binging can be a procrastination technique. Yeah, which is ironic. Very busy people can still be procrastinating because they're not getting the important stuff done. Yeah.
Yeah. I read it during COVID in the beginning when things were kind of shut down and it was really new. I spent a couple weekends going through old stuff, and I pulled a bunch of stuff out of the attic and organized. I looked at a lot of old letters, and I was reading a letter I had written or my wife had written to me when we were dating, and I was starting to work and she was still in college. And it said, "I know how busy you are, Scott, and I'm hoping it'll slow down soon." And I was reading this, and honestly, emotionally, it was wrecking me, because as I read it, I was like, you are the same as you were 20 something years ago. And you think you've grown so much. And at the end of the day, there's parts of me that have grown so much, but some parts of me that are still always just a little too busy. And
some of that is internal though, too, isn't it? That we don't calm ourselves down internally, and others really pick up on that. Like we're that wheel inside is spinning so fast. One of the things I had to do to get ready just to be with you today, and I even had to catch myself at the beginning because we had so much fun talking even before we started. We could feel the energy between us.
yeah,
Is just to slow down a little bit because I have to think too, right? And the key word, and you used it actually in the conversation before we started the podcast, is showing up, right? I have to show up for Scott today. I made a commitment to talk to him. That means I have to show up for him. I have to listen to what he has to say. And when we do that, we slow down in an important way. And so it's not always just that we take on too much. It's that we almost like we're catastrophizing inside. But there's this to do and there's that to do.
yeah.
And again, we can go back to some of the tools. The calendar helps because it outsources my thinking. It's written there. I've got the right time for it. I can let go of that right now. I don't have to rehearse it constantly. And it's also about emotion regulation, which again takes me back full circle to, and emotion regulation is the solution to procrastination too. If I'm using avoidance as a coping mechanism, well, aren't there others I could use? Yeah, I could calm down to start with. Like I could take a deep breath right now. And if I do that, and I will, just even that one, I just feel my whole body start to relax. And it changes my conversation with you because I think differently. I do 2 or 3 of those, and now I've engaged the prefrontal cortex again. I reduce the amygdala hijack, right? That's the first strategy I'd start with, that emotion regulation. So being busy, to go back to what you were saying, yeah, you are the same guy you were before in other people's eyes, and some of that is internal, right? And some of it won't go away, like because it's quote quintessentially Scott.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that that's how you have to be in the world all the time, right? We can act out of character per se. Yeah.
It's a great awareness. I think it brings up another great value add to any high performance life or thinking, and that is reflection. When you can look back, you mentioned this in the beginning of our conversation where you write everything down. Well, the beautiful thing about writing everything down, and Dr. Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan wrote a book called The Gap and the Gain, and it talks about how so many entrepreneurs live in the gap, and they constantly are looking at, they kick a 30-yard field goal, and they're like, oh, now I can kick a 35, I can kick a 40, I can kick a 50, and the goalposts just keep moving back and back. But what you described is the gain. And when you actually take a few moments to look back at what you've accomplished, you feel good. And so the very thing that you're often avoiding, which is what you talk about in procrastination, is that feel good moment of tomorrow that never comes.
Yeah, big time.
There is some wins if you're writing it down and you're seeing it. And for me, reflecting on that letter, I was able to say, okay, these are areas I haven't gotten better in. And maybe it's just a high energy part of my personality. You know, people always think that I'm doing way too much, but if I'm not doing way too much, I feel bored. So that's ADHD too. We all know that. But at the same time, you know, I'll pause there because I'd love your insight on that. But the reflection and the gain that you look at every day has to help us feel more accomplished and get more done.
Yeah, so there's some solid social psychological research, not out of my group, but others, psychologists, that show that when we make progress on a goal, it fuels our well-being. And you have to reflect on the progress you've made, right? To know you've made progress, you have to look at what you've accomplished. And this, again, is really crucial to anyone who's tuning in, because we're talking about procrastination, is that if you can make a little bit of progress, like prime the pump, that's going to fuel your well-being. We all know the downward spiral of procrastination. The more I put it off, the worse I feel, and the more I put it off. Just a little bit of progress. What's that next action I can do? And if we do that action, we make that bit of progress, we reflect on it, and we go, that feels good. And of course it does. And that's going to fuel your well-being to do more. But then you bring in this present and future self, which is really an important part of the whole story as well. Hal Hirschfield out of UCLA has done some amazing work, and he's got a book coming out in June 2023 called Your Future Self. I've seen it. It's a great read. Hal's a great guy. You should talk with him for sure. But some of his research shows that there's a real discrepancy between present self and future self. We actually think about future self more like a stranger, physiologically, and certainly in terms of how we deal with future self. And in our research, we've shown that if we can think about future self more, we develop more empathy for future self, and that empathy is related to less procrastination. So there's a few things in there. Of course, there always are. And the second one is this discrepancy between present self and future self. And it's part of the procrastination story. Oh, future self will do it. Future self hates present self for that. You know, shut up. I don't want to do it. I'm going to have more time pressure. But if you look ahead to future self, you say, I don't want to do that to future self. And on top of all that, when present self gets a bit done, we feel so good. Yeah. On a personal note, I start every morning. I'm up early. It's just my nature now. And I enjoy coffee, and I've cleaned the kitchen up, and I'm enjoying a coffee, and I reflect on my day, and I can reflect on what I accomplished yesterday. I look ahead, and I just get oriented about what's going on today. Right. And that's a great feeling. It grounds me in a very practical way.